After the hulking, murderous adult form of Jason Voorhees was first realized in 1981's Friday the 13th Part 2, the following year saw Paramount serve up Friday the 13th Part 3. With Part 2 Steve Miner back in the director's chair, Part 3 was shot in 3D, featured arguably the smartest, quickest Jason ever seen, took place one day after Part 2, so technically Saturday the 14th, right? Had some fantastic kills and delivered some of the franchise's most memorable characters such as Chris Higgins, Shelley Finkelstein, and badass biker Fox. But away from that, there are plenty of other details and trivia that make Part 3 such a fun franchise entry. Now with that in mind, I'm Andrew from What Culture Horror, and here are 13 things you probably didn't know about Friday the 13th Part 3. The first Friday the 13th movie to be released on Friday the 13th. Friday the 13th Part 3 was released on Friday the 13th, August 1982, making it the first of 5 Friday the 13th films to be released on, well, Friday the 13th. Following in Part 3's footsteps, there came Friday the 13th, The Final Chapter, on Friday the 13th of April 1984. Then there was Friday the 13th Part 7, The New Blood, on Friday the 13th of May 1988. Then there was Jason Goes to Hell, which is an awful film. It's a really, really bad film. Don't watch it. It's horrendous. But that came out on Friday the 13th of August 1993. And then there was Marcus Nispel's Friday the 13th reboot, which came out on Friday the 13th of February 2009. With the Crystal Lake TV series now in development from Hannibal's Brian Fuller and A24, and currently hopeful of a late 2024 premiere, there just so happens to be Friday the 13th of December on the horizon towards the end of the year. Just saying. It started a David Bowie tradition. As is often the case, Friday the 13th Part 3 operated under a working title while in production. That title, it was Crystal Japan, named after a 1980 David Bowie single that narrowly missed out on being included on Bowie's Scary Monsters and Super Creeps album. With that, Part 3 started somewhat of a tradition, with several Friday the 13th movies taking Bowie tracks as the inspiration for their working title. For example, Friday the 13th A New Beginning went by Repetition, taken from a song on Bowie's 1979 Lodger album, while Friday the 13th Part 6 Jason Lives went under the Aladdin-same name of Bowie's 73 album and its title track. And then there was Friday the 13th Part 8 Jason Takes Manhattan, which goes back to Scary Monsters to borrow the Ashes to Ashes working title. Gloria Charles overcame her fear of heights. She may have only been in the film for a handful of scenes, but Fox is a major fan favourite amongst Friday the 13th fans. Played by Gloria Charles, this biker butts heads with Shelley and Vera at a local store, tracks the kids down to Higgins Haven, and eventually has a pitchfork put through her throat by Jason Voorhees. In between all of that, one sequence sees Fox swinging from the top of the Higgins Haven barn. For the actress behind Fox, this was the toughest scene of the entire film. As Gloria Charles later noted, she had a very real fear of heights, meaning the prospect of shooting this scene was a terrifying one. However, Gloria used this moment as an opportunity to face that fear head on and successfully overcome that fear of heights. Unfortunately, Gloria Charles left us in 2017 at just 61 years of age. Very much missed. Higgins Haven was accidentally burnt down by a fan. Like so many movie locations, the house used for Higgins Haven became quite the tourist spot for horror fans. Built purposely for this film, the Higgins Haven home and its barn were constructed at the Veluzat Movie Ranch. Unfortunately though, only the barn, well, and a fireplace, remain standing at this very day. Sadly, 2006 saw the main Higgins Haven building accidentally burned down, supposedly by some Friday the 13th fans. From piecing together information online, a group of teenagers visiting the property decided to light the Higgins Haven fireplace. Not actually a fully functioning fireplace though, this inadvertently set the roof on fire, which in turn completely torched the building. At the time, one of these fans posted a picture of the fire on the old Friday the 13th forum.com. Shout out to anybody who was on that forum back in the day. Reports surfaced in 2021 that the Higgins Haven house was to be rebuilt at that very same location, but there doesn't appear to have been any movement on that matter since then. Tracy Savage's final movie role. Playing the role of Debbie, a character best known for having sex in a hammock and reading Fangoria, hey, we've all been there, Friday the 13th Part 3 was the final film of Tracy Savage's career. Deciding on a different career path, Tracy has gone on to become a notable broadcast journalist in the years since then, covering such major cases as those involving O.J. Simpson and Heidi Fleiss, and winning a couple of Emmy Awards along the way. Fantastic work. As Tracy herself has explained in certain interviews over the years, she'd been acting since the age of 2, had decided she was done with the industry before Friday the 13th Part 3, and only ended up involved in the movie because her mother had already booked her for the audition. Tracy Savage would have a handful of small TV roles years later, but for the most part, Friday the 13th Part 3 really was it for her acting career. Friday the 13th, The Game's Richard Brooker tribute. With Friday the 13th, the game sadly set to close its service for good at the end of this year, many fans will be disappointed to see such a great game head off into the sunset. Yes, it had its fair share of server issues, and you'd meet some fun players online, but man, that game will be so missed. Of course, it's franchise favourite Kane Hodder who provided the motion capture work for Friday the 13th, the game's Jason, but when it came to the Part 3 version of Jason, the folks at Gun Media and Ilphonic took the chance to pay tribute to Richard Brooker. Richard Brooker played Jason in Part 3, and he sadly passed away in 2013 at the age of just 58. As an homage to the actor, his likeness was used for the unmasked version of Part 3's Jason in this magnificent game. The casting of Richard Brooker. With police officer turned stuntman Steve Daskovich, aka Steve Dash, playing the masked version of Jason in Friday the 13th Part 2, a decision was made for a quicker, more agile Jason in Part 3. Enter Richard Brooker, a Los Angeles-based stuntman with a background as a circus trapeze artist. Having answered the casting call for an imposing figure in an unnamed Steve Miner movie, the 6'3" Brooker had no idea he was actually auditioning for Jason Voorhees. Given his lean, toned frame, Brooker wore padding during the shoot to make Jason look bulkier. And as for direction, all Steve Miner told him was to think of a human version of the shark from Jaws. As for Richard Brooker the man, he led quite the life, being a sailor, an expert polo player, a horse trainer, an amateur photographer, a director, a producer of sports TV. He created his own website design company, and he won an Emmy Award for Outstanding Achievement in Engineering Development back in 2006. Quite the life indeed. The Dial M for Murder connection. With the 3D route decided on for Friday the 13th Part 3, this was when writer Petru Popescu was brought in to do some uncredited script rewrites. Unfamiliar with the 3D horror movies of the 1950s, Popescu was taken to a screening of Alfred Hitchcock's Dial M for Murder by Part 3 director Steve Miner. A huge fan of that film and of Hitchcock period, Miner thought this tense crime thriller would be the perfect introduction to the 3D concept for Popescu. Of course, the obvious sign up here is Dial M for Murder only actually had a couple of screenings in 3D upon its initial release in 1954, with audiences only taking interest with the film when it started showing in actual standard 2D. Interestingly, before going with Friday the 13th Part 3 in 3D, the minds at Paramount Pictures actually contemplated doing a 3D Star Trek movie, before ultimately deciding that 3D would be a little more fun in a horror setting. Larry Zerner was cast because of Mad Max 2. Shelley Finkelstein is one of the most popular or unpopular characters of the entire Friday the 13th franchise. Forever, people have opinions and thoughts on Shelley, and those thoughts will never ever end. Forever pranking his pals or faking his own death, Shelley is simply desperate to be liked, but just to a pretty annoying degree. And for actor Larry Zerner, he landed a Shelley role partly due to the Road Warrior, aka Mad Max 2. 18 years of age at the time, Zerner was handing out tickets for a Road Warrior preview showing in Westwood, Los Angeles, but he was spotted by Friday the 13th Part 3 writers Martin Kitrossa and Carol Watson. Upon seeing Zerner, the two said they had the perfect role for him, that being Shelley. And while Larry Zerner would still have to audition for that role, if it wasn't for Mad Max 2, he might never have landed the Shelley part. The first appearance of the hockey mask. Yes, the die-hard Friday the 13th fans out there will be well aware of this, but more casual horror fans might be surprised to learn that Part 3 is the first film to feature Jason's iconic hockey mask. And while many like to dump on Shelley, it was down to him that Jason first picked up the hockey mask that's so synonymous with the character. In typical Shelley fashion, this comes after he'd been shunned by Vera for playing yet another prank. Please, Shelley, come on, man. Skulking off to the nearby barn to see what else he might be missing out on, it's here that Shelley meets Jason and has his throat cut off screen, and then Jason takes that hockey mask as a parting gift. Why a hockey mask? While director Steve Miner and producer Frank Mancuso Jr. have at times been credited with giving Jason his iconic hockey mask look, it appears that 3D supervisor Martin J. Sadoff is the one responsible for that decision, with Mancuso wanting to move away from what he called the no-substance visual of sackhead Jason in Part 2. Big-time hockey fan Sadoff just so happened to have some hockey gear with him on the set of Part 3, deciding to put a Detroit Red Wings hockey mask on Richard Brooker for a lighting test. With that move, horror movie history was put in motion, with makeup effects director Doug White then creating a larger vacuum form mask, and art director Terry Ballard adding 3 red triangles to complete the look. So the hockey mask look was basically stumbled on by accident, with Mancuso saying all involved immediately realized though that they'd found Jason's signature piece. These days though, eBay lists Martin J. Sadoff signed hockey mask complete with the inscription, "I put the mask on Jason." Yes, really, go and check them out. Jinnys' next return. Having survived Jason's roaring rampage of revenge in Part 2, the intention was to bring Amy Steele's Ginny Field back for Friday the 13th Part 3. That was until Steele herself turned down that opportunity. As Amy Steele has explained in the excellent Crystal Lake Memories documentary, Ginny was going to return as a trauma patient in a mental hospital, with Jason tracking her down and killing a bunch of patients along the way, because that's Jason Voorhees. As Steele puts it, this version of Part 3 was referred to as Friday the 13th meets Cuckoo's Nest, in reference to the Jack Nicholson starring One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest. Why did Amy Steele choose to not return then? That's because she thought she'd go on to other things and wouldn't have time for Friday the 13th Part 3. A decision that the actress has said, in hindsight, she absolutely regrets. The change to Chris Higgins' previous Jason encounter. In Friday the 13th Part 3, Chris Higgins is shown traumatized by a previous encounter with the unmasked Jason Voorhees, an encounter we eventually see in flashback form. However, this attack was originally intended to be a lot worse, as it initially called for Chris to have been sexually violated by Jason and was to have been outright stated by the Chris character. Of course, the final film instead sees that scene play out with a little more ambiguity, as Chris's memory of the event is a bit hazy, and this was down to Dana Kimmel, the actress behind Chris Higgins. Dana got into an argument with director Steve Miner about the need, or lack thereof, to bring sexual assault into this attack, which is an argument she thankfully won.